every time I've given someone a second chance, it hasn't worked. So I keep asking myself, why do I give people second chances when I have a history where it doesn't work?
For a role that pays roughly $150 to $200K, you're losing $5,000 a day.
So $5,000 a day for not having that role filled.
You could lose millions in 6 months to a year by having a critical role open. What's the point of amazing breakthroughs in science if most of the population can't understand what you put down in paper? You got to be able to explain it in layman's terms. And if you can't, you're not confident about your intelligence. If you're hiding behind big words and you can't explain what you're thinking to the masses, are you really that intelligent?
Hi, welcome back to another episode of the MedTech Cyber Podcast. Today we have a guest who I met at MedTech World USA in 2026 at West Palm Beach. She is a recruiter. I don't know if recruiter is the right words. Staffing pro, also a rock climber, does some yoga, quite a few different things. And she's read my book. So I think it'll be an interesting conversation because we'll talk about emotional intelligence and some of the challenges involved with reading people in order to staff your organization and also just managing people in general. This is something I struggle with. I need to learn to follow my gut more than my logic. And we'll talk about the MedTech life sciences industry and recruiting in that industry. But Samantha also started recruiting in cybersecurity. So she has, both perspectives, which is interesting. So welcome to the show, Samantha. I know you're with Apex Pro Placement. Maybe you can explain a little bit about your background and what brought you here today.
So I now represent Apex Pro Placement. We're a life science executive search and direct hire staffing firm, but I've been in the staffing industry my entire career, and I got my first taste of it doing cybersecurity recruiting in college to make ends meet. And really fell in love with being able to elevate the careers of people who I saw as much more intelligent than me. And after, I've recruited for everything under the book. Started off in cybersecurity, then I did, admin and operational. The majority of my network is in the life sciences, so extremely technical there. And I've noticed that it's the people with the highest emotional intelligence that rise to the top, that are the most successful. And there is an opportunity for improvement within the technical world. And I found it really insightful and refreshing how you in your book break down why technical people are the way they are, and what are the reasons behind some of the notorious communication patterns that stunt their growth, like being bombastic, for example, right? You can sound smart, but if no one understands what you're saying, it doesn't matter because you're not accomplishing anything. And I love how your book not only breaks that down, but you break down kind of the emotional walls and barriers that lead up to this, that kind of are 7 layers deep. And so I found it really interesting and insightful. And it was a pleasure meeting you and your wife at the MedTech conference and just skimming the surface before reading the book fully.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that you read my book. I've had people that work for me that have not read my book, and they had challenges with the things I wrote about in my book. I remember I had a job where I was a VP, and this is just my perspective, and my CEO had these 6 books on her shelf. I wrote all those books down and I read all of them so I could understand what she was thinking about and how to better communicate with her when she was saying things. But that's how I approach things. And I would think if she had written a book, in order for me to have a better relationship with her, or working relationship, I would have read her book. But I had people on my team that have recently left my organization that never even read my book. But ironically, the things we had challenges with were the things I addressed in my book. So what are some of the biggest challenges you've seen with recruiting? Is recruiting the right word, or you prefer staffing? Because I hear people kind of use them interchangeably.
Recruiting, when I say I'm a recruiter, it's just a job title, right? I could say I'm CEO, I'm director, I'm VP, but at the end of the day, the basis of what I do is recruitment. And I think that's easier for people to understand. And I'm not too proud to call myself that. So you can say recruiter. Technically, I'm the CEO of Apex Pro Placement, but tomato, I'm still out there in the trenches recruiting for the clients that I communicate with on the daily. I'm sure in the future that won't be the case, but when you're a small business, that's kind of the benefit, right?
Why should I use recruiter? Or like, why not just do it myself? Because I struggle with this. I know a lot of recruiters, and I think I don't want to pay them this percentage to recruit somebody. I can just do it myself. So maybe you can explain why I should use someone like you, because this is something that I go through quite a bit because we're growing. We need people periodically. But then I think I don't want to pay like 20 to 30%, and I don't want to have this like thing to buy them out.
You don't want to rely on an outside recruiter, right? Because it's more costly if you can fill it internally. Finding a job is a job in itself. Now, if as the CEO, you have time to screen thousands of unqualified resumes, deal with ghosting, interview people, schedule the interviews, follow up, collect references, if you have time for that, do it. But usually you don't. And I
Mm-hmm.
actually have a cool tool that I just developed. Most people don't realize that for critical roles, especially in the medical device or life science space, now the multiplier is different. Some industries are higher stake, but on average, for a role that pays roughly 150 to 200K, you're losing $5,000 a day in operational efficiency. Other people are having to pick up the slack, and it affects the organization, right? And
So
then when
5,000 a day for not having that role filled.
for having a role open, a critical role
Okay.
open, you could be losing up to $5,000 a day, which in higher level roles, it's even more. So you could lose hundreds of thousands or millions in 6 months to a year by having a critical role open.
Hmm.
When you work with a recruiter, I mean, not all staffing firms are created equally, but usually when you work with a recruiter, it's because you have a high stake role that you don't have the time or the network to fill on your own. And so when you're looking for recruiters, not all recruiters are created equal. If you have, an executive level role in your space, I would focus on recruitment firms that specialize in cybersecurity or that specialize in the life sciences. And there's also different staffing models. Um, that 20 to 35% that you're talking about is direct hire, meaning that when I place the candidate, they automatically become an employee of yours. The
Okay.
buyout is for contract staffing.
Okay.
Um, and you contract staffing is also something I don't offer contract staffing. I only do direct hire. But sometimes it makes sense to use contract staffing because you have a project and you really don't have the overhead to pay an employee for an entire year or two, but you really need someone for 6 months. Instead of hiring them and firing them like a lot of companies do, you could just pay a slight premium and contract them. And it saves you money because you don't have to onboard them. You don't have them on your payroll. And a lot of times it's a try before you buy model, right? Sometimes people don't have unless you've hired every day, all day for the past 10 years, you don't have as much of that gut feeling developed. And you really need to work with the person for 3 months, 6 months before you decide that you want to bring them on. And that's a benefit of contract staffing. I'm very happy for the companies that do that, but that's not my business model. I focus on finding people their next work home. I place them and ideally they stay there for years to come. But you want to rely on a recruiter when you don't have the network or the time or the knowledge to properly vet these people.
That's a good point because it does take a lot of time and effort to find the right person. And I'm a believer to be slow to hire and quick to fire, even though I've made the mistake of being slow to fire. A bad hire can really be costly to the organization. And then you have to go rehire somebody. You have to offboard them, onboard them. It's a lot of hassle, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's why companies will pay $40,000 for a two or plus, that's a low fee for a $200,000 role, because if you don't get that role filled within 2 to 3 months, you really do risk losing hundreds of thousands of dollars. And a bad hire can cost you a lot of money. That's why they use staffing firms. But if you used a expert staffing firm for every role within your company, your margins wouldn't be as good as they are. So that's why you want to pick and choose when you need and who you use, because it's just as much about the person you're working with.
So how do you, as a staffing firm, like let's just say I said, hey, I need a new director of operations. and I give you like the job description, the high level responsibilities. How do you go about finding that right candidate for like my organization? I mean, you do this every day. I don't. So you know how to read people better. You know how to probably pick up if people use AI for the resume, or they're reading the answers off the screen when they're trying to, you're interviewing them, and all the other, tactics people try to get by things. So how do you like find that right candidate or narrow it down?
It always starts off with something that your book mentions is really important, and that's listening to the client. There's only so much you can put on a job description. I will not work on a role unless I have one assigned contract and a job description, but I also need a minimum of 20 minutes with whoever this person is going to be reporting to.
Right.
And there's a set of questions that I ask, and the questions branch off from there, right? After so many years of experience, if this means this, and you got to ask this. And so there's a set of questions that I ask. And then I take all of that information along with the job description and I send it back to the client. And I say, this is what we discussed. Let me know if we need to change or add anything. And you're kind of like a job therapist, right? And then the next part to that before you even start the search is setting expectations. After so many years in the industry, I know what candidates cost. I know what the pipeline looks like. I can look at the pipeline at the drop of a hat and let you know if you have realistic or unrealistic expectations. So if there's tweaking on the search needed, I'll do that. And what I mean is, sometimes somebody wants a VP, but they only have director level money. What can they do? And so I kind of consult them on little things they can tweak. Or sometimes they want somebody with a really specific subset of experience. And there's other things that narrow the candidate pool, like it has to be in office 5 days a week. So I consult them and say, okay, well, there's this many candidates in this region. People don't like to commute 2 hours, but if you have hybrid, you have this many candidates that we can reach out to. And sometimes you do what they want first, like you want the local person there, you try and reach whoever fits as close to what they're thinking as possible, but then you have to expand and you have to set expectations. So half of it is just one, being a job therapist and getting what they're thinking out on paper, because 9 times out of 10, the job description doesn't accurately describe it.
9 times out of 10, you said?
Yes, because the job descriptions are written by people who aren't doing this job.
Right.
And a lot of the times, talent acquisition people, for better or for worse, they're hired and fired, right? They're brought on, not that I agree with this, and this isn't always the case, but they're brought on for a year or two during a ramp-up stage, and then they're let go. So they're not as invested in the company. But you really need to understand, like, how this person is going to be working, what cross-functional teams they're going to be working with, what kind of degree is acceptable, right? Like maybe you need someone from a specific background, or maybe you don't. And there's other industries that have transferable skills. Like these are all things you need to dive into. And from there, then you have enough information to properly set expectations with the candidates. I know I said before, I don't do contract. I don't have the time or the desire to have that many people working under me. So when I place a candidate, they're automatically an employee of that client. And in order for me to be successful, I need them to stay for a long time, right? Even if the guarantee period is up, I'm not going to get repeat business if they leave 6 months or a year later. It's not a good look unless the client did something wrong and I can consult them on that. But the more you set expectations up front with the candidates about what to expect, the better retention you have down the line. So it's a long, intricate process that I've just gotten good at over the years.
How much because I'm looking at some of the notes you send me, EQ, emotional quotient, or emotional intelligence play in your role? And I have a note here that your father nagged you about maybe going to finance or nursing or a doctor, and you realize your emotional intelligence was one of your superpowers. So does that play into your role today? And then what's your perspective on emotional intelligence in life in general? Because I know you had a couple of the comments about my book in that topic.
I think it's extremely important, and I don't think it was appreciated until recent years. I think there's many forms of intelligence. And I think that corporate America and the schooling system was made to create workers.
Mhm.
It wasn't made to create innovators. And so we're testing people on a tiny sliver of intelligence. And the people who excel in that area, who do well on their SATs or who are good at math, there's a false sense of respect for them, just like there's a false sense of respect for me for being a CEO, because so much more goes into success. It doesn't matter how smart you are. If you have all this knowledge, but you can't disseminate that to people, you're only one person. You can only go so far. So real success is emotional intelligence and having the ability to communicate what you want effectively in a way where people actually respond the way that you want them to. So emotional intelligence is huge in corporate America. But I think that there's different kinds of intelligence and all kinds should be celebrated. Like if you try and teach a fish how to climb a tree, it'll spend its life thinking that it's stupid, right? There's athletic intelligence, there's emotional intelligence, there's artistic intelligence, there's technical intelligence. And I think that some people lean towards one more than the other, and we can make an effort to develop ourselves.
Yeah, that's a good point. Something that is a little contrarian point of view to my book. I just had a podcast recording a couple days ago with somebody that is an expert on neurodivergence. And they're saying, kind of like you said, a fish climbing a tree. We have neurodiversity. Our brains are all different, but there's neurotypical, which is kind of the way most people operate. And there's neurodivergent, which means you operate different. Your model of the world is different. And those people can learn emotional intelligence, but it's going to take a lot more effort than somebody that is neurotypical, as an example. And, this talks about like the spectrum or whatever people like the term like to use. And I would think for myself, I can easily sit all day in front of the computer and not talk to anybody. I would say I'm probably neurodivergent, but to become a successful business person and write books and do speaking and the goals I want to achieve, I had to overcome those things. But maybe I'm not as neurodivergent as other people. I don't know. It's just an interesting thing because the idea is, or the premise is that you can have a growth mindset, but like that fish climbing the tree, it's going to be a hard road if you are neurodivergent because it doesn't come even remotely natural to like know how to interact with people. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I think your book makes a good point about explaining how we're wired certain ways because of the way we grew up. But I had never heard of neurodivergent until you just mentioned it.
Yeah, like autism would be neurodivergent.
I need to educate myself more on that to properly speak on it. But I know that there is such a thing as neuroplasticity. And I think that for those who are wired a certain way, who it might be harder to have emotional intelligence, I think your book has some great activities to kind of help people rewire their brains. It's a common misconception that you can't learn new things as an adult. That's just simply not true. Humans are meant to move, adapt, or die. That adapt aspect is in us. So if we make an effort to change the way we think and view the world and regulate our emotions, it might be harder for some people than others, but I think it's possible. And I think your book is a great resource for that. I seriously do think that we would be winning more of the cybersecurity war if people use the tactics in your book. And I mean, shit, I wish my lawyers would use it. Like, I had to my lawyers the other day. I was like, guys, I don't want my clients to need a contract, just to need a lawyer just to work with me. They're already paying me a fee. Can we tone it down?
Can we simplify it?
Yes. And I think the scientific community can benefit from that, because what's the point of amazing breakthroughs in science if most of the population can't understand what you put down in paper? You got to be able to explain it in layman's terms. And if you can't, you're not confident about your intelligence. If you're hiding behind big words and you can't explain what you're thinking to the masses, are you really that intelligent?
That's the age old question, I think. And people want to feel significant. And one way a lot of people feel significant is being smarter than other people. And one way to be smarter than people is talk over people's heads where they can't understand you. And that reinforces your ego and your identity that you're smarter than them. But in my perspective, if you can communicate complex topics in a way that anyone can understand, that's a true sign of intelligence, not the other way around. But maybe I'm the minority that thinks that way.
No, I 100% agree. And I think, don't quote me, but I think Albert Einstein said something along the lines of that. Maybe it was Newton, one of those smart dudes. But it's true. And George Washington was historically known to be good at what he does because he wasn't a master at everything, but he knew how to communicate and he knew who to put in power for what.
In MedTech, it's a little bit of a challenge for a lot of people because there's a lot of super smart people in MedTech, probably the smartest people in the world. You got, entrepreneurs, PhDs, MDs, people inventing things that are going to change humanity. It's a super highly intelligent industry, and sometimes not so much emotional intelligence. But I've noticed by being part of MedTech Innovator, watching pitches, watching companies try to get funding, that it's super humbling for some of these really, really smart people with really brilliant ideas when the investor says, I don't even know what you're talking about. Can you tell me that in one sentence, what the problem is, how you solve it, and how big the problem is? And a lot of people have trouble distilling it down to something that's simple. Because in their mind, they're so used to this world of acronyms and complexity that it's hard for them to talk in a layer that other people understand. But you're not going to get an investment, and you're not going to sell the product if people can't understand at that level. And I see this play out quite often in our industry.
To be honest, I've been offered, people have reached out to me to want to invest in my company, and I want nothing to do with it.
Why not?
Well, because I've worked for the largest privately owned staffing company in the world, one of the largest publicly owned staffing companies in the world, and I've worked for the largest healthcare staffing firm in the United States before launching my own staffing firm. And I've seen what works and I've seen what doesn't. And I don't know if you've noticed, but staffing industries don't always have the best rep. And so I've noticed that and this is just with any company, sometimes you need capital, right? That's when you have investors and you have shareholders. But in capitalism, there's just this like constant growth mindset that puts pressure on people at the bottom line. And one, the organization gets so big that it's dehumanizing. People just become cogs in a machine and they're more likely to use sleazy tactics. I'm not going to name names. This company isn't even on my LinkedIn because I worked for them for like 4 weeks. But I've seen some really sleazy tactics out there in the recruitment industry. People posting fake jobs just to get candidates or, asking candidates, hey, tell me where you're applying so I don't send you there. And then they're going and trying to send another candidate behind their back.
Really?
Yes, dude. Like I've seen some, and actually that same company offered me like double what I was making, tried to get me to give all my contacts and then fired me 4 weeks later. And I was like, joke's on you. I didn't sign a non-compete and I took your client list. Sir, I haven't looked at their client list because I don't need to. I don't need to do that to succeed. But I've seen some sleazy things. And it's because a lot of the times, this isn't all the time, but a lot of times investors put this pressure on people at the bottom of an organization and they don't always use the best tactics. I don't want that pressure. I want to be my own boss. I'm dedicated to my clients, not my investors. Sometimes that means taking a hit on a deal and withholding that candidate, even though you could place them and you'd make money, they're not a good fit for XYZ. And you withholding that would piss off your investors, but it's going to win you the client years down the line. And I find that not having investors allows me to make better decisions. I'm less greedy. I'm less pressured because I really got into recruiting to elevate companies and careers one placement at a time. And that gets convoluted when you have unrealistic growth goals. So people have reached out to me shortly after launching to want to fund my company or be an investor. And I'm like, no, I don't want that. But I'm lucky enough to be in a position where I can do that.
Yeah, I don't have investors either. I sold my first cybersecurity company and took the money from that exit to start this one. But it's a double-edged sword. I could probably scale much faster if I had investors, but then depending on the type of investment, a family office wouldn't put so much pressure, but a PE firm would definitely put pressure to scale quickly so they could sell to another PE firm. And that, like you said, at some point you're dehumanizing your organization potentially, and you're scaling just to hit a number so your organization can be sold so the investors are happy. I mean, there's different strategies and different tactics, and it works for a lot of people, but it's just stuff to like obviously be on the lookout for.
Well, especially when you're dealing in the recruitment world, I feel like the big box model is broken. Because at the end of the day, you're dealing with people's livelihoods.
Right.
I mean, the at-will law in Florida is insane. Like, people can just hire and fire you willy-nilly. A lot of people who these staffing firms are hiring, like, especially the ones on contract, they're living paycheck to paycheck. They have families to feed. So, I'm really excited to have the opportunity to do something different.
Probably an interesting job because you get to kind of bridge the gap between what somebody's looking for and find the right person. And it sounds like there's a model where you're only successful if you place the right candidate and they stay on. So there's some pressure on you too to not just fill the position, but make sure you got the right fit.
Yeah, I have different models. I mean, for clients that I have that gut feeling about, or they have bad credit, maybe I've never worked with them before, there's a retainer. But I have a contingency model too, where I have a list of great candidates. It would be so easy for me to find them. Yeah, if you don't, I mean, why should you pay if I didn't find you the person that you need?
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned the gut feeling. How important do you think that gut feeling is in dealing with people, like to hire them or to make a decision? Because I think before we started recording, you were talking about something and a gut feeling, and your gut was saying one thing, but you're rationalizing another. And what I've noticed is if I paid attention to my gut feeling, I try to go back on all my decisions when my gut said something and I logically overrode it, that my gut's never been wrong, or my inner feeling or the inner voice has never been wrong.
Call it intuition, psychic ability. There's different names for it, but there's science behind this, whether it be epigenetics, right? When you jump, when there's a loud noise, that's like, even a baby would do that, right? That's like years of evolution that's in their brain, and they know like, oh, loud noise, big bang, danger, right? And so there's that. That's part of your intuition, but it's also your own experiences. And so your brain recognizes these patterns over time. And maybe you can't put the patterns down on paper the way AI can, but your brain is smart enough to know that there's enough patterns there to give you that gut feeling. And I absolutely use the gut feeling. Like, there's executives, that I've spoken with, and, first, it takes experience. First, it takes the beginning of your career and a couple like really bad hires for you to be like, damn, like But now I kind of know. Like, I interviewed a CSO the other day, and I would make a lot of money if I placed him. But the only thing he talked about was money and how much money he wanted to make and this and that. I'm not going to put him in front of a single client. I'm not going to tell you that, but like, you are like, that is not who I want representing my brand and who I want responsible for the livelihood of everyone at that organization. And so that's just like a blatant thing, but there's other little things. I think you should always listen to your gut feeling. You don't always have to act on it right away, but it's there for a reason.
Yeah, I agree. And like I said, the times I've ignored my gut feeling or my body's reaction to things, like a visceral reaction, like, the hair is standing up, or the chills you get, your body is sending you a signal about a specific person or a specific situation. And I think it's important to pay attention to that. Maybe not react immediately, but if that's a persistent feeling, there's probably a decision that needs to be made. Even though we can logically say, well, I'll give this person a second chance, or I'll give this person another chance. Like if I look back at my decisions, every time I've given someone a second chance, it hasn't worked. So I keep asking myself, why do I give people second chances in work when I have a history where it doesn't work?
You want to see the good in people. I think that makes you a good person. But, there's another thing in your book that it's towards the end where you talk about like, it's the technical people who need more than ever to separate themselves from technology, not only with monotasking, like focusing on one thing at a time, but also knowing when to step away. And I think that, call me a kook, but there's science, like there's a thing in your brain called the pineal gland. And when you're constantly looking at blue light, like computer screens, it becomes calcified. And so your pineal gland, or like your third eye, is responsible for your connection to the spiritual world, if you believe in that. But scientifically, it's important for the regulations of a lot of hormones. And when you spend more time out in nature or like with your friends, just like not looking at a screen, your pineal gland is more activated, if you will, but you also become better at realizing things that don't exist in the digital world, like that gut feeling. And so we've become so advanced and so removed from nature and from each other that we're losing this other form of intelligence that's been prevalent in a lot of cultures for a very long time. And we're just now being able to describe it with science.
So you think because a lot of us are immersed in technology, like, I see people walking around, they just have their like down their phone like the whole time. They're gonna get text neck, as they say, like your neck's is screwed up because you're always looking down at your phone. There's like zombies to me. Like they're not in the real world at all. They're just on their phone. But that and the computer screen has an effect on our third eye, our ability to, it's like subduing or degrading that gut feeling is what you're saying.
Yes. Actually, it's like my husband, like we used to like bicker about this, but now we don't. Like when we're on dates or if I make you dinner, like you're not allowed to go on your phone. If we're at the dinner table, like your phone is off and you're like engaged.
Well, you probably like my book then because I talk about the exact same thing in my book about being present. Yes.
Yes. And it's so important. And I think that people's attention span is shorter than ever because we don't have to be present anymore. There's always a digital pacifier there to appease us. And you're not giving yourself the opportunity to sit with your thoughts and process. Just like your brain processes information when you sleep, you do that when you're daydreaming, and constantly like being told what to think is removing people from their intuition, from their ability to communicate, from their ability to read real facial expressions because they spend more time looking at an avatar in front of a screen.
I agree with that. I found myself for a while there in front of the computer screen way too long, and then just like watching TV and going to bed. And I realized it was affecting my emotional and mental and just spiritual groundedness. So what I started doing is making some intentionality or with some intention to go for a run or for a walk outside. And then when I used to do it, I used to make sure I'm always listening to something audible. But then recently, I've been walking or running and just listening to the wind and the birds and in nature, and I feel like more fulfilled and happy and content by doing that for some reason. And I guess it's more connecting to, the larger part of the planet versus just like what's in front of my screen, I guess. I don't know. But it's something that even when I listen to Audible, because I told myself I got to be productive, I have to listen to Audible, I got to do this, even when I'm walking, I realized it didn't have the same effect as just listening to nothing but what's around me, like in nature.
I mean, humans like to think that they're so special. But we're not. Like, we're not removed from nature. We are part of it. Just like a cat or a dog would be really unhappy in a cage its whole life, we're going to be unhappy in front of our screens in our home our whole lives. It's so important to get out there. And, um, I also think the scientific world needs to realize that humans aren't any better than animals because, you look at animal testing and clinical trials.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, fun fact, I broke down in front of a former director of Johnson and Johnson when I learned about clinical trials and how many it was really embarrassing. I cried. But we did develop a study guide about preclinical R&D, and I won an award for it. But yeah, humans are as removed from nature as we would like, as much as we like to think. We're part of it. And so putting ourselves back in it is so good for your health. It's so good to help increase your intuition and that gut feeling and help you process. Because similar to your book, being busy doesn't necessarily mean that you're being productive, right? Like you could do a bunch of little small things and be stressed and take every call and walk around and tell people and brag about how busy you are and give yourself an autoimmune disease. Or you can just realize you can only do so much, and I feel like when people take the time to one monotask like you mentioned in your book, but also recharge properly,
Mm-hmm.
you are more efficient even though you're not necessarily working as many hours. They've done studies in Europe with the 4-day work week, and a productivity skyrockets. So you don't always need to do more.
Yeah.
It's about intention and quality and balance.
I heard recently that there's a lot of recruiters that say for $10,000 retainer, I'll shortlist you. I'll get you in front of all these clients. I'll get you a job, making this amount of money quickly. And then they disappear. They just take your money and run. Is that a pretty common thing today?
I mean, I don't know because they reach out to me every day, like these people. A lot of them are from other countries. And yeah, they're like, hey, I can do your business for you for this much money. And I'm like, great, but I can do that too. And if that's what I'm actually doing. So no, thank you. But there's I know that when I was working for a very large public staffing firm, there were hackers who were pretending to be part of that company and stealing people's information. So yeah,
Mm.
there's a lack of trust and you really need to do your due diligence. I would say if you're dealing with a recruiter, look at how many connections they have. If they have one connection and no picture, that's a red flag. Um, and also do research on the company. Big or small, if it's a legit company, they're going to have a website. They're going to be verified on Dun& Bradstreet.
If it sounds too good to be true, it's probably...
If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And then there's another caveat in the recruitment world. What I've noticed is you'd think AI, it's going to make it easier to recruit. And so the more I see AI in the recruitment space, the less worried I become about it taking my job, because what's happening now is that people aren't thinking for themselves. They're solely relying on AI. And so a lot gets lost in translation, right? Because you're not properly fully checking your work, not only on the candidate side, but on the company side. So companies are using AI to make job descriptions that don't properly align, and candidates are using AI to help them build their resumes and blindly apply. And you have a stack of misalignment. Really, at the end of the day, proper recruitment is about real connections. That's what you're paying for,
Mm.
because anybody can go online these days and get a Rolodex and call themselves a recruiter. And if that's what you want to pay for, great. But, not all recruitment firms are created equal. I use AI to do my bitch work. I'll use it to... Pardon my French, I was raised by sailors, but I'll use AI to do research or to quality control an article, to check for spelling errors, to create Excel
Yeah.
spreadsheets. But when I'm looking for people, for my clients, I'm talking to them face to face, and I'm looking at their resume and I'm comparing it to their LinkedIn profile. And I've caught a few figures. I talked to one woman. She gives me her resume. And then I follow up a couple months later and I notice that her LinkedIn is completely different from when we spoke. And I called her out on it and she doesn't answer me. So it's like, okay, you've been found out, X list you. But no, there's a lot of AI noise in the recruitment world. And so I would say if it's too good to be true, it probably is. And at the end of the day, you want to trust a human with your livelihood, with your company, right? With the bottom line of your company and your livelihood and your personal life, you want to trust a human, someone who has real connections, who meets their clients in person or at least face to face. AI can help you, but you don't want to rely solely on it because it still needs human oversight. It's only as good as the person using it.
I know you mentioned, you rock climb. That's one thing, but you said you only trust your husband to belay you.
Yeah, he's one of those people. There's like 2 or 3 people, but he's one of them.
And why is that so important to have trust in who's belaying you in rock climbing for those of you that don't rock climb?
So when you're rock climbing, it's like a pulley system, right? Well, we'll explain top rope because there's sport climbing, trad climbing, and I don't think we have enough time in the podcast. But it's basically for simple purposes, it's a pulley system. So you have a pulley, a rope, right? And you have one person climbing the wall, and there's a pulley up top, and another person feeding the rope through a system. And if you fall, they catch you.
If they're paying attention.
If they don't catch you, you deck and you die.
Right.
And so, am I confident? Like I wouldn't be up there rock climbing if I didn't have the strength and confidence to do it. But you're out in nature, mistakes happen, rocks can slip, you can get tired. And there is a risk of falling, which is why you have the rope and your belayer. And if your belayer isn't paying attention or, they're not clipped in properly, you could die. So yeah, I have a lot of trust in my husband. I remember one time I was climbing in Colombia and I was sport climbing. So this is when you climb and instead of the rope being up at the top already, you clip as you go.
Yeah.
That's like all you. That's all you climbing. And so I was about to clip over this like overhang and like missed it and fell out like 20, 30 feet. And it was the softest catch. I mean, it was so soft, and that's who you want having your back. Similar to how you want, and I would put as much trust in my cybersecurity professional as I would in my belayer, especially if I had a pacemaker or, a medical device that's life or death. Your cybersecurity professional, you need to trust them as much as you would trust your belayer.
Yeah, that's a good analogy there. I like it. So we're coming up here on time. So I like to go around and see what's a key takeaway or key message from our conversation. So what would you say, Samantha, is a key takeaway for our listeners based on our conversation today?
There is a huge opportunity for people in cybersecurity and the technical spaces in general, life science, the legal field, to continue to elevate themselves and stop hiding behind fancy words and algorithms. And, true success happens when we show empathy and we properly communicate with each other. That's when we really accomplish things. It's not when you spit a bunch of fancy mumbo jumbo and nobody can understand you. I think emotional intelligence has been highly undervalued for a while. And I love that that's becoming not the case. And I really think that anybody in the technical field who considers himself a technical person would benefit from reading your book. I really do.
Well, thanks for the plug on the book. I think my key takeaway is very similar. You mentioned there's different types of intelligence. I think you even labeled athletic intelligence. I think that's important because as a society, we've focused only on IQ or rational intelligence, but that's one type of intelligence. And I think we've placed so much emphasis on that people seem to think that's all that matters. But as studies have shown, people that have higher emotional intelligence often than someone with rational intelligence will get the promotion above somebody else because their peers like them. They can communicate better. They understand the environment better, and they can often navigate circumstances better based on their emotional intelligence. That's not always the case, but that's generally the case, it seems like. So ideally, like in my book, I advocate, if you have a high IQ, you're only going to raise your potential by raising your EQ as well. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Samantha, for being a guest on the Med Device Cyber podcast.
Thank you, Christian. And if you or anybody else has executive level hiring needs, you know who to call.
Where can they find you?
Honestly, I'm the first person that pops up. If you Google my name on LinkedIn, you can contact me on my website, apexproplacement.com. Send me a LinkedIn request, message me. You could also text me or call me on my work line, +1 772-202-0103.
All right, awesome. I hope everyone enjoyed this episode and you found some value out of it, and hope to see you on the next one.